You've never once in your whole life told a lie you didn't believe. Sit with that for a second, because it sounds impossible, right? But it's not a trick, and it's not an insult. It's a fact about the machine sitting behind your eyes right now. Somewhere inside your skull, there's a lawyer. Not a judge, a lawyer. And that lawyer has exactly one client, you. Its job isn't to find out what's true. Its job is to win the case every single time, no matter what the evidence says. And here's the first big reveal, the one I promised you before we even got started. The feeling of being right has almost nothing to do with actually being right. Researchers who spent decades studying how the brain makes decisions found something unsettling. Your sense of certainty is built by a completely different part of your mind than the part that's supposed to check the facts. One system moves fast, feels everything instantly, and never doubts itself. The other one is slower, lazier, and this is the part that stings. It usually can't be bothered to double-check the fast one's homework. Think about the last argument you had, the real one. Maybe with a partner, a coworker, your mother. Didn't it feel in the moment like the truth was just obvious? Like anyone with half a brain would have seen it your way? That feeling wasn't proof. That feeling was a defense system doing exactly what it was built to do. Quick thing before we go further, if this is already scratching at something familiar, hit follow now. What's coming in the next few minutes is going to reframe how you see every disagreement you've ever won. So let's ask the uncomfortable question. Who are you really when you're wrong and you don't know it yet? Psychologists have a name for the exhaustion that comes from constantly holding yourself together, from biting your tongue, from resisting the donut, from forcing a smile at someone who annoys you. They call it depletion. And here's the twist nobody expects. Every act of self-control draws from the exact same tank. Force yourself to sit through a boring meeting without checking your phone, and an hour later, you're more likely to snap at your kid, more likely to buy something you don't need, more likely to give up on a hard problem. It's not about willpower being a nice metaphor. Scientists actually tracked blood sugar levels during these moments of strain, and the pattern was consistent. The harder your mind works to hold the line, the faster its resources burn. Now, stretch that idea a little further. If defending your self-image takes real, measurable energy, doesn't that mean your ego isn't just a personality trait? It's an active, hungry system, one that's running in the background of everything you do, whether you notice it or not. And that's the part almost nobody talks about. We treat narcissism like it's a costume some people wear. The loud ones, the bragging ones, the ones who make everything about themselves. But what if the quiet, exhausting work of protecting your own image isn't reserved for those people? What if it's happening inside you right now, every time you explain away a mistake before you've even finished making it? Here's a small experiment worth trying on yourself tonight. Next time you're wrong about something small, a fact, a direction, a guess, watch how fast your mind reaches for a reason it's not really wrong. That reflex, that split-second scramble for cover, is the whole story of this video in miniature. And by the end, you're going to see exactly why it happens, why it's nearly impossible to catch in the moment. And this is the part that actually matters. What you can do the next time it fires off without your permission. Because the mind doesn't lie to protect the world from you. It lies to protect you from yourself. Let's go back to that woman at the party. Call her Joan. You meet her for 5 minutes. She's warm, she laughs easily, she remembers your name. And somewhere in the back of your mind, without a single scrap of evidence, you decide she'd probably donate to charity if you asked. You liked her voice, so you like her opinions. You liked her smile, so you assume she's generous, trustworthy, maybe even smart. None of that was ever proven. You just filled in the blanks and called it knowledge. This is where the second layer of the reveal comes in, and it's bigger than the first. Your mind runs on a rule researchers summed up in 5 words. What you see is all there is. Whatever information happens to land in front of you, that's treated as the complete picture. Not because you're lazy or careless, but because building a smooth, coherent story out of scraps is what your brain is optimized to do. Coherence feels like truth. It isn't the same thing, but it feels the same, and that feeling is enough to move you. Here's an old classroom trick psychologists have run for decades. 2 lists of words describing 2 different people. Person 1, intelligent, hardworking, impulsive. critical, stubborn, envious. Person 2, envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, hardworking, intelligent. Same 6 words, just flipped in order. And almost everyone who reads both walks away liking person 1 more. Why? Because the first word you hear sets the tone for every word that follows. Intelligent makes stubborn sound like conviction. Flip the order, and envious makes that same stubbornness sound dangerous. Nothing about the person changed, only the sequence did. And your mind quietly rewrote the story to keep it tidy. Now here's where it gets personal. If a random sequence of 6 words can flip your entire opinion of a stranger, what do you think happens every time you replay an old argument in your head? You're not remembering what happened. You're remembering the version that keeps your story coherent, the version where you come out looking reasonable. There's a courtroom study that captures this perfectly. 2 groups listened to the exact same case. One group heard both sides back and forth, weighing the evidence like a jury should. The other group heard only one side, but a complete, well-organized one side. Logically, the one-sided group had less information. They should have felt less sure. Instead, they were more confident in their verdict than the group that heard everything. Less information, more certainty. Read that twice because it's the hinge this whole video swings on. That's not a flaw that only shows up in courtrooms. That's the architecture of how you feel certain about anything. Your job, your relationship, your politics, your last big decision. Confidence was never really about how much evidence you had. It was about how clean the story felt. And clean stories are addictive. Once your mind builds one, it starts hunting, quietly, automatically, for anything that fits. And it starts going soft focus on anything that doesn't. Ask yourself if a friend is generally a kind person, and your memory floods with warm moments. Ask instead if they're often unkind, and suddenly a different set of memories surfaces just as easily. Same person, same life, completely different evidence depending only on the question you happen to ask yourself. If you're starting to notice this pattern in your own head as we go, that itch of recognition, do me a favor and drop a like. It genuinely helps this reach the people who need to hear it before their next disagreement spirals out of control. Because here's the layer waiting just underneath all of this, and it's the one that ties directly back to that hidden ego we opened with. If your mind will happily build a flattering, coherent story out of almost nothing, what's stopping it from building the most flattering story of all? The one where you're always the reasonable one in the room? Here's a story that used to unsettle me every time I heard it. A professor spent years grading essay exams the same way, reading one student's entire test front to back, question by question, before moving to the next student. He noticed something odd about his own scoring. If a student nailed the first question, he found himself giving them the benefit of the doubt on every murky answer after that. It felt fair in the moment. Surely someone that sharp on question 1 wouldn't stumble on question 2. So he changed his method. He graded everyone's answer to question 1 first, then moved to question 2 across the whole stack, keeping the first scores hidden from himself until he was done. And that's when his confidence in his own grading collapsed. Because now, again and again, he'd give a strong student a rough score on the second essay. Then flip back and discover he'd rated that same student's first answer as excellent. Same student, same exam. Wildly different grades, depending only on the order he happened to read them in. If a trained professional can't trust his own judgment of a stack of papers, what does that tell you about the confidence you carry into every performance review, every first date, every argument where you were obviously right? This is where overconfidence stops being a personality flaw and starts looking like a design feature. Founders of new businesses, for example, tend to believe their odds of success are dramatically higher than the actual survival rate of new ventures. Not because they're foolish, but because the story they've built about their own competence feels airtight from the inside. Even people whose ventures collapse often walk away still convinced they've mastered the game, just unlucky this time. The failure gets absorbed into the story instead of shattering it. And this is exactly where hidden narcissism lives. Not in the person shouting about how great they are, but in the quiet, constant editing your mind does to keep your self-image intact. You don't need an audience for this. You do it alone, in the shower, replaying a conversation and sanding down your own rough edges until the version in your head is a little more graceful than the version that actually happened. Here's a question worth sitting with, and I want you to actually answer it, not just nod along. When was the last time you changed your mind about something that mattered? Not because someone out-argued you, but because you looked at your own reasoning and admitted it was thin? If you're struggling to think of one, you're not broken. You're human. Because admitting your reasoning was thin means momentarily letting the lawyer lose the case. And that lawyer has spent your entire life training for exactly one outcome: acquittal. There's a strange comfort hiding in this, though, and it's the pivot point of everything we've covered so far. The same system that protects your ego from small, everyday wounds is the one that once helped your ancestors act decisively without freezing under uncertainty. Total, brutal honesty about every gap in your knowledge would be paralyzing. So your mind trades a little accuracy for a lot of forward motion. Most of the time, that trade works out fine. The trouble starts when the stakes get bigger than a party conversation about Joan, when it's a diagnosis, a marriage, a business built on a story that was never as solid as it felt. So here's the real question hanging over the rest of this video. If your mind is always going to defend you, whether you deserve it or not, is there any way to catch it in the act? There is, and it's smaller, stranger, and more doable than you'd expect. Remember that tank we talked about earlier, the one that drains every time you force yourself to hold it together? Here's the piece I saved for last because it changes everything you've just learned. That tank isn't just fuel for willpower, it's fuel for honesty. When your mind is tired, worn down, running on fumes from a long day of holding your composure together, it doesn't get more careful about protecting your ego. It gets sloppier and more automatic about it. The lawyer works fastest exactly when you're least equipped to notice him working. Which means the moments you're most likely to defend a bad decision, dodge a fair criticism, or dig in on an argument you've already lost aren't random. They cluster at the end of long days, after hard choices, in the middle of stress. That's not a coincidence. That's your ego picking its moments. So here's the shift. The one small, honest habit that actually works. Catch yourself not in the argument, but after it. Not while you're defending the position. You won't win that fight. The lawyer's too fast for you in real time. But an hour later, a day later, when the tank has had a chance to refill, ask the question you couldn't ask in the heat of it. What did I actually see versus what did I fill in? That single question does something remarkable. It doesn't shut the lawyer down completely. You wouldn't want it to, not really, since a small amount of self-protection is what gets you out of bed some mornings. But it puts a second voice in the room. A quieter one. One that's allowed to say, maybe the story was cleaner than the truth. And here's where this loops back around to where we started, 40 minutes ago, with the lie you never noticed you believed. Every person watching this right now is going to close this video, walk into their next conversation, and feel completely certain about something they haven't actually double-checked. That's not a failure of character. That's just what the machine does. Somewhere out there, right now, someone else is walking into an argument they're positive they'll win, building a flattering story out of half the facts, running the exact same defense you just spent this whole video learning to spot in yourself. The only difference between them and you is one small, uncomfortable habit: pausing after the fact long enough to ask what you actually saw. That's it. That's the whole secret hiding underneath the loud, obvious kind of self-importance everyone likes to point at in other people. The quiet kind is the one running your life. And now that you've seen it once, you won't be able to unsee it in yourself. If this changed how you'll look at your next disagreement, let me know in the comments. I want to hear which part hit closest to home. And follow along, because next time, we're going even deeper into the parts of your mind that think they're driving, when really they're just along for the ride.